Hello, everybody. It's Friday. Hey, best day of the week. Welcome to Food Safety Fridays. My name's Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Today's topic is what is GFSI and how does it apply to compressed air? And today's guest presenter is Erin Zimmerman from Trace Analytics LLC, who are one of our kind sponsors. So happy Friday, Erin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Happy
You're
to be here.
welcome. You're welcome. It's very nice to have you. And whereabouts are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from bright and sunny Austin, Texas.
Oh, you're making me jealous because it's really wet, miserable, blustery, windy in Manchester, but we're still happy because it's Friday. So tell us where you're joining from in the sidebar, everybody. It's always nice to see you. Mayank from
Yeah,
India. We got Christine from
Dubai.
Wisconsin. Rajaya from Sudan, Nigeria, Onuwanata. I mean, literally, Dallas, Sarahi, Algeria, Farid, all over the world. It's great to see you, and you're all
Wow.
very welcome. Yeah. So I'll play the video ads from our sponsors, and we'll be back for Erin's presentation in a couple of minutes. Okay, slides are up. Hand you over to Erin. I'll be back for the Q&A later, so enjoy.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, again. My name is Erin. I'm the Customer Service Manager here at Trace Analytics. Today, we're going to be talking about what the Global Food Safety Initiative certifications say about compressed air in food and beverage manufacturing processes. So because these schemes are often a little vague, it can be helpful to reference the common languages like ISO 8573 and employ individualized risk assessments for determining those limits. So today I'm going to discuss food safety and quality certification bodies, how to determine purity requirements, and then we'll talk about how to test your compressed air gas. So Trace Analytics is an A2LA accredited laboratory with ISO 17025. This accreditation to the standard means that our laboratory meets both the technical competence requirements and management system requirements necessary for us to make and deliver technically valid results. Our scope includes a broad range of capabilities encompassing breathing air, industrial, and manufacturing air and gas quality specifications. So Trace is one of the leaders in testing compressed air and gases worldwide, and I'm very proud and honored to be a part of this team. We pride ourselves immensely in customer service and education. So today, after we talk more about what GFSI is, we'll follow up with a Q&A session where we'll be able to answer any of your questions. And of course, as always, if we aren't able to get to you, our host Simon will be able to send me a list of any unanswered questions so that way we can follow back up with everyone. So here's just a little bit more about me. I've been with Trace for 7 years. I originally started as a customer service representative, and that's actually where my passion truly lies. I love talking to our customers. I love taking those technical phone calls and helping you guys through difficult situations. So that way you feel supported and confident in knowing that we have your backs through the entire process. So again, I live in Austin. Um, I've been here for about 12 years now. I love it, and I highly recommend visiting if you haven't made the journey yet. So what is GFSI? GFSI is the Global Food Safety Initiative. It's a business-driven initiative for the development of food and safety management systems to ensure that food facilities are processing safe food for consumers worldwide. So this coalition has a few different goals, but it's ultimately working to benchmark and harmonize safety requirements and standards. These food safety goals cover a wide range of topics, but the main ideas are a commitment to food safety, communication about safety requirements, control over hazards, monitoring and verification, and then, of course, conscious improvement. So I'm assuming that since you're here with me today, you have goals about your monitoring plans, which is awesome. So your goals probably feel and sound something like, how can I make sure that I'm meeting the requirements to keep my products safe for consumers? And maybe something like, how can I make sure I'm in control of my processes? So we are fully aware that compressed air and gas is one of just many moving pieces to accomplishing these goals. However, given that compressed air is in so many cases used as an ingredient, it is an essential utility. So with that being said, we have to consider its safety and quality. We must make sure that the compressed air system is being monitored and in full control throughout the entirety of the year, and not just right before you're getting ready to test or before an audit. So GFSI doesn't specifically explain how to handle the testing or monitoring of your compressed air system, but it does recognize what certification programs say to do. And we'll definitely dive way more in depth into that in the next, in the rest of the presentation. So GFSI ensures that certification bodies are communicating up-to-date and accurate information to you guys, the manufacturers. And depending on where you're located in the world, you may choose you may choose to utilize any of the recognized certification programs. So what does that mean for us? So because compressed air and gases are a key utility in food and pharma, beverage and packaging production, it's imperative that manufacturers have guidance on testing. monitoring for safety, and of course, audits. And because it's a critical utility, it comes into contact with so many different facets in the manufacturing process, it can absolutely be the source of contamination if not properly maintained and monitored. So many manufacturers that I've spoken to in the past few years are totally unaware of the risk that contaminated compressed air or gas can actually pose in their processes. When they're first picking up the phone and giving us a call or sending us that initial email to get their programs started. But thankfully, um, the certification programs and international standards can help guide us all on what we should be looking for and how to monitor compressed air and gas systems for things like safety and quality. Okay, so believe me, I know that this is a lot to wrap our minds around. But I wanted to share this with you because the best way it's been described to me is that you can think of GFSI as like the parent who makes sure that all of the children or their schemes are following the rules for food safety. So GFSI is asking us questions like, does the supplier clearly state what they manufacture and how they do it? Things like, does the supplier follow their own food safety procedures and plans for monitoring? Is all of this documented where it's easy to find and chart like a trend analysis, and even see times where maybe corrective action was necessary to take? This is all super important because we know that the documentation is a key part in the auditing process. And this is so that facilities can prove that there weren't any lapse in their food safety protocols and procedures. And also so that you guys can show your auditors and say, yes, we found this issue, but here it's documented that we took these steps, X, Y, and Z to be able to course correct and make the systems better. So ultimately, GFSI wants to make sure that we're all saying what we do and that we're doing what we say and that we're documenting it. And that goes especially for compressed air monitoring too. So, it's not just enough to check a box right before, to say, hey, look, I tested for my audit. We actually want to take a look at the risks associated with contamination and make sure that the compressed air or gas quality is appropriate for you guys as individual usages. So although that GFSI doesn't certify any organizations, it does recognize and accept food safety certifications. Okay, so let me break this down a little bit more. GFSI has a goal of global food safety. They recognize certification bodies who then audit the manufacturers to make sure that they are saying what they do and doing what they say. So certification bodies like SQF and BRCGS utilize ISO 8573 as their common language. All right, so I've already lost count of the number of acronyms I've used so far, but I think we're all in the same boat. But here we have some examples of some schemes that you guys are probably familiar with. And these are all GFSI recognized certification bodies. So for example, working at Trace, I work with lots of companies that want to meet SQF and BRCGS requirements. So both of these programs discuss compressed air monitoring, and auditors absolutely do check to make sure that this is happening when they do their visits. All right, so let's dive a little bit more into the details of those. Okay, so here's specifically what SQF Edition 9 says about compressed air and gas. So normally, I would not bore you guys with reading this, specification word for word. But in this case, I feel like it's really important for everyone to fully understand what the schemes are telling us, because it's important for you guys to know, so that way you can prepare, and that way, you know, your audits go successfully. So 11551 says, compressed air and other gases like nitrogen, carbon dioxide, that come into contact with food or food contact surfaces shall be clean and present no risk to food safety. Shall is the key word in these in these um, in these instances. So 11552 says, compressed air systems and systems used to store or dispense other gases that come into contact with food or food contact surfaces shall be maintained and regularly monitored for quality and applicable food safety hazards. The frequency of analysis shall be risk-based and at a minimum annually. So the addition of the sentence, the frequency of analysis shall be risk-based and in a minimum annually, to the code clarifies the minimum frequency of monitoring that your auditors are going to be looking for in future inspections if they haven't already. Okay, and then next we have what the BRCGS says. So this is section 454. Air or other gases and steam used directly in contact with or as an ingredient in products shall be monitored to ensure this does not represent a contamination risk. Compressed air used directly in contact with the product shall be filtered. So again, you'll notice the word shall, and the fact that they're recognizing, because it's used as an ingredient in and coming in direct contact with, it's a key utility in your manufacturing facilities. So ISO 8573 is the International Compressed Air Standard that both SQF and BRCGS point to. This standard outlines the types of contamination to monitor, the types of analysis that are acceptable. That's important, especially for what we're talking about here today. And the purity classes that manufacturers can choose to test to. This standard is kept to date regularly. And fun fact, we actually just hosted the ISO 8573 working group here in Austin, Texas. So they discussed the 8573-7 working draft that actually our lab director, Maria Sandoval, wrote. So of course, we're very proud of her. Okay, so let's talk about what you should be looking for within your compressed air gas system. Specifically, what our common language ISO 8573 says you need to be monitoring for. So contamination refers to things like particles, water vapor, oil aerosol, oil vapor, and microorganisms in both compressed air and gas. So all of these, of course, can affect the quality of the air, which can contribute to contamination of the end product. So particles can be things like dust, rust, metal shavings, tape, or in some cases, even the product itself, depending on what's being processed, packaged, or manufactured. Many products are dusty. Many products create their own dust. So all of that can easily be sucked in through the intake and then introduced into your system. And then it provides a breeding ground. And so, those are all things we have to be aware of. So like I said, particles can be introduced through the intake, of course, but also through leaks. Or anytime the piping or system is opened up and exposed to the ambient air, like it might be during any kind of addition or, maintenance. So making sure that we're aware during those times is crucial. So particles, I want to point this out, are measured in microns, which are extremely small and many times not even visible to the naked eye. So what helps me to visualize this is that you can imagine taking the sharpest pencil you can think of and making the tiniest little prick on a sheet of paper. That, if you can see it, that might be roughly the size of about 10 microns wide, which isn't even on the ISO purity class chart. And so I like to bring up that example and point that out because we've had, we get questions from our customers who might be confused about their particle results because they don't physically see any signs of debris or dust like you might in, a manufacturing facility that produces a dusty product. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist in the ambient air around us, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to get introduced to your system, and it doesn't mean that your system might not be creating them on its own. So that's why I like to bring that up. But so the ISO purity class chart measures water vapor at pressure dew point because compressed air systems and gas systems should be operating as clean and dry. So you may have heard of CDA or clean dry air when referring to compressed air systems. This means that we do not currently test for liquid water or oil in compressed air systems. So if you're seeing liquid, even condensation coming from your point of use, that could be a sign that you need to check out your filtration and schedule some maintenance there. So 8573 says that total oil is oil aerosol and oil vapor. This is absolutely something that Trace Analytics is able to provide for our customers. So the way we break this down is we calculate your oil aerosol and your oil vapor results individually, and then we combine them on your final report and provide that to you as total oil. And then we have micro. So that falls under ISO 8573-7, which is a part of the compressed air and gas lines to ensure that product safety. And in recent years, bodies like SQF have also included it in their recommendations for testing, which is really cool because we've definitely seen many more manufacturers in the food and beverage and even packaging industries start including micro testing since that happened. And I think that's really cool because it's so important to test for dangerous microorganisms. Manufacturers want to know to be on the lookout for things like Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, because they can obviously be really harmful for end users. And then also for manufacturers who use gas, certain types of microorganisms can grow in non-oxygenated environments. So sampling for microorganisms in compressed gas line is just as important as it is in testing for compressed air. So it's important to know the difference because you'll want your results to actually be indicative of what could be growing within your systems. So, some organisms might grow in air and not be able to grow in gas, and vice versa. So depending on what you're working with, you need to make sure that your testing is correct. So at Trace Analytics, we can provide and do provide a few different types of analysis. So the first one is enumeration. That is a total plate count. That is, we look at the plate and just let you know how many colonies may or may not have grown on it. Gram staining is, you can think of as like the next step, and it's the first step in being able to identify what types of organisms are present. So it's kind of like an elimination process there. And then this is recent for us, and we're extremely excited about it, but we have microbial identification where we can actually tell you the genus and species. So, it's great to know if you have less than 5 colonies on your sample plate, but what actually are they? If it's something potentially dangerous like Listeria or E. coli, you're going to want to know to be able to remediate, because as we're all well aware, microorganisms can cause recalls. It can damage brand reputation. And then, of course, most importantly, it can harm the consumer, the end user. Okay. All right. And so because many of these schemes don't tell you what classes you should be testing to, I thought it would be helpful to discuss how manufacturers determine classes they should be meeting. So this is definitely one of the most frequently asked questions we get. So ISO 8573 purity classes are broken down by levels of risk based on what the manufacturer determines those risk levels are for their individual use and systems and products. So to help with this, we've come up with a risk assessment and monitoring plans guide to help our customers in determining what their risk level actually is. So because no two facilities, manufacturers, compressed systems are alike, it's not going to be the same across the board. It's not a one size fits all. So the BRCGS points to, our common language, 8573, and the BCAS scheme has set limits for direct and indirect contact to help manufacturers follow it. So this scheme is cool because it's actually the only one that has set limits for direct and indirect contact. It's a great scheme to familiarize yourself with, even if you don't live in the UK. And it's definitely something that I've pointed to for guidance for customers asking these questions here in the United States. All right, so now we are the laboratory. We cannot and will not tell you what purity classes you need to be testing to. But I thought it would be helpful to show some examples of what we see across the different industries. This is just what we've seen in our years of experience working with different types of manufacturers. So that is available, on our website, and it's just an example. It's just something to take note of, but we always recommend doing a risk assessment and making sure that the purity classes you choose are appropriate for your system and for your end product. And of course, I did want to mention, if I haven't already, our risk assessment and monitoring plans are going to be available for download at the end of the presentation. So make sure you take a look at those if you haven't already. Okay, so now we have how often to test and where we should be testing. So SQF, FDA, ISO, again, are pretty vague on this topic because they leave it up to you guys, the individual manufacturers, to decide what is best for your specific use. So in the beginning, when you're just getting started, it can feel overwhelming. And I've worked with a lot of customers who have communicated frustration when it comes to this, because they're unsure of what to do. So when I'm talking to them, I try and reframe it in a more positive light and remind them that this actually gives you guys the power to determine what is best for your system, and what is acceptable for your application and final product. And just like no two compressed air systems are alike, the same is true for your monitoring plans. They're not going to be the same for everyone. Um, and that's because particles, water, oil, and microorganisms can already exist in your compressed gas, um, or become introduced, like I said, through intakes, leaks, or even improper maintenance. Um, we always recommend doing a point of use test for both purity and contaminants on a quarterly testing schedule. And the reason why we always recommend quarterly testing is because if you're only testing once a year, it's going to be really hard for you to troubleshoot if you're unable to narrow down at which point during the year a problem could have actually started. And this is because outside factors like production time, seasonal changes, they're always going to play a huge role in the overall health of your compressed air system. And like I keep saying, there's no one size fits all when it comes to monitoring plans. So always making sure that you're doing risk assessment. And the one that we've come up with has a list of materials that may be used in your facility, that can walk you through your facility and take you through any critical control points that could potentially become sources of contamination. Um, so again, definitely check out the monitoring plan and the risk assessment and utilize those tools. We want everyone to have them, to have access to them, and to keep them in your compressed air tool belts. All right, so there's my spiel about quarterly testing. And with regular testing, you'll be able to really get to know your system, to start to be able to build a trend analysis. And this way you can start to take proper precautions at specific times throughout the year when, things like production spikes, weather changes, planned or even unforeseen maintenance. So here we just have two little examples. The first one is semi-annual testing, and the second is annual. So you'll see the difference. Semi-annual testing, you'll see more spikes in particulate and water. Whereas in the second chart, it's pretty, it's just a downward projection. But that doesn't mean that those spikes didn't happen. It just means that testing wasn't done, so you're unable to account for those. So, that's why, a phrase I like to say is out of sight, out of mind is not recommended when it comes to compressed air testing to ensure the overall safety of your products. Okay. So as I mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, We at Trace Analytics really pride ourselves in our customer service and education. Our team really takes the education part to heart because we want to set you guys up for success. We understand that compressed air testing is only a small part of your jobs and what you do on a daily basis to help make sure that your entire process is running smoothly and safely. So we want to help make sure that everything from why should I test to how do I perform the test, and then all the way at the end to what are my test results actually telling me, goes as smoothly as possible. And we want to be there for you every step of the way. We're able to answer questions like, what do the standards say? How do I collect the samples myself? And then we're even able to provide troubleshooting for potential issues and point you in the right directions. We're not there on the facility floors with you, but we can talk about our experiences and what we've seen in the past, and also provide you with any resources that we have available. Okay, so here is how we can help. Here is our K810 air check kit, and this guy tests for particles, water, and oil. So just to quickly walk you through the equipment, you'll see a flow meter. That's where you're going to regulate your flow rate. The flow rate is super important because to maintain throughout the duration of the test, because it's how we determine the volume of the air sampled. And then you'll see in the middle, that's our filter cassette. Inside that, there are 3 membranes that collect for particles and oil aerosol. And then next, you'll see a smaller flow meter. And sticking up at the top is our Drigger tubes where we test for water. That's also where you're going to test for oil aerosol. And then that little silver piece down at the bottom is the universal MPT adapter. We offer 2 different kinds depending on your PSI, and we also offer them with or without quick connects. That's where you're going to actually connect the equipment to your sampling point. Everything runs consecutively. And the sample times are going to be based off of the either purity classes or the package that you're trying to meet. So we have easy to follow instructions and sampling videos online. So if you'd like to learn more about this kit, definitely check out our website or reach out to us directly. This kit, I will say, does have some limitations when it comes to particle size ranges, but for the most part, the K810 air check kit meets about 99% of our customers' needs for particle testing. Also, this equipment and the sampling media that goes along with it is almost always readily available. And then next we have our Pinocchio. This is used for testing microorganisms. It's an impaction sampler. And after setup, it only takes about 10 minutes per sampling point. So it's really quick and easy to use. The version that we have pictured here is the first edition funnel-only Pinocchio, named after the little wooden boy with a similar likeness. 8573-7 states that you must use an impaction sampler when testing for microorganisms in either compressed air or gas. So that's why we use the Pinocchio. This is one of my favorite pieces of equipment because it's so straightforward and easy to use. You simply connect to your sampling port, measure your pressure using the 2 little valves and a flow meter that we provide. And then once you have the correct PSI, you close that off, connect the funnel head, and which is what houses the contact plate, and start your 10-minute sample. We also have beautifully designed and easy to follow instructions for this equipment that, of course, because it's micro, stress the importance of a aseptic procedure to ensure that samples are collected properly and not contaminated, not accidentally contaminated by the person collecting the samples. So for this equipment, we're typically able to ship within about a week or two. So making sure that you're scheduling dates and communicating that with your customer service or sales rep as soon as possible is recommended to make sure, ensure your availability and that you don't miss any kind of auditing dates. Also, don't forget to ask about our AirCheck Academy. This is for your sampling technicians. They can take a course, they can take a quiz, and then print out a certificate of completion to keep with your auditing records. This not only adds value to your records, but it ensures that they're fully prepared prior to sampling to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of material, but I hope I was able to give you a better understanding of what GF, there are those acronyms again. GFSI is the benchmark, what benchmark schemes it points to, and ISO, our common language. If there was anything I didn't cover or something you still have questions about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. You can reach me at sales@airchecklab.com, or please stay tuned for the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much, Erin. I'll just get rid of the slides. There are one or two questions that we can hopefully address. From Daniela, do you know the requirements for FSSC 22000 as it relates to compressed air? Any recommendation for specification that should be observed for microbial testing?
So I am not familiar with that specifically 2200, but I will definitely, let's get her contact information and I will find out for you, Daniela.
Okay. Another question from Daniela. We only have CAM2 testing kit. Is that sufficient for FSSC, or do we need to use the Pinocchio kit?
Yeah, so we use the Pinocchio kit. I understand that I don't know if the CAM2 is actually an impaction sampler or not. Let me see if I can check that out really quickly for you.
Okay. I mean, if you want to, for Daniela,
we can always follow back. But I know there was a time when we were considering using the CAM2, and we decided to go with the Pinocchio. But I would have to ask our lab director, Maria Sandoval, who headed up our micro department.
Well, those two questions from Daniela, you can put those two together, and I'll send those to you to follow up directly. Maino question: how about ambient air testing?
Yeah, so we can. I wasn't able to cover that in our presentation today, but we do. We can help you with testing for ambient, and many of the schemes do talk about ambient air testing and that it needs to be monitored as well. So we offer laser particle counters for testing particles, obviously. We also have a piece of equipment. It's called a Triobos, and it's almost like it kind of looks like a little handheld vacuum cleaner that you set a contact plate in and you turn it on and it sucks in the ambient air so that you can actually test the ambient air for microbial as well.
Okay, great. Question from Leah. Is it necessary to test for oil, water and particles, or is it just testing for micros sufficient?
So if you're following what SQF or BRCGS, they both point to ISO 8573. And 8573 talks about particles, water, oil, and micro. In recent years, they recently just added micro. In the past, it had always just been particles, water, and oil, but now it's all four.
Okay. Dawn, do we collect samples and send it for testing?
Yes. So all of our equipment requires that they be sent to our laboratory for analysis. We currently don't have any on-site, any pieces of equipment that give you on-site results. But that's why we have our great customer service team who can empower our customers to feel confident in being able to collect those samples themselves. We even work with distributors who maybe you're in the compressor manufacturing industries who can go out and collect those samples for you. So, we like to offer both options, but all samples do come back to us.
Okay, great. And Dawn, can you use it with Petrifilm?
Petrifilm. I'm not familiar what Petrifilm is.
I think it's like for growing microbes on a Petri dish, those plastic
Oh,
dishes.
okay, great. So we use contact plates. They're similar to Petri dishes, but they have a few. You can use them in a few different scenarios, like with the impaction sampler for contact plates, or even settled plates, depending on if you're wanting to test for ambient air. So the Pinocchio and the trio bars that I mentioned earlier are fitted for those plates, which is why we use them.
Okay, a couple of country-specific ones from Mary. Do you have a lab in Canada if we like to send samples to you?
So we don't have a lab in Canada. Our only facility is located here in Austin, but we work with customers worldwide. We send testing for particles, water, oil, and micro to Canada daily. So we don't have we normally don't have any problems shipping back and forth between the two countries. And we have many customers in Canada who test successfully with us. So I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Okay, and Martin, a similar thing with regards to samples. Are they sent to facilities in the UK? No, to the
No,
US.
yep,
But
to the US.
but you have customers in the UK, do you?
We do. We the only we definitely can help you test for particles, water, and oil. It gets a little bit tricky the farther away we get, just because the microplates are so time sensitive, and they do need to come back to us next day. And typically, the quickest we're able to see shipping back and forth between us and the UK might be 2 days. So there is some risk there, but we do have many customers in UK as well.
Okay. Christine just clarified Petrifilm is a product that 3M makes that is comparable to a Petri dish with agar solution.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Martin, in water spray retort with overpressure, is necessary to apply tests for air used?
Yeah, so I think what he's asking is that they're using compressed air to spray the water, to propel the water. Yes, I would also test that air, prior. before the water is introduced, because if the air is coming into contact with the water, if the compressed air is contaminated, that's going to contaminate the water, and then that can contaminate the food surfaces that you might be spraying down, or
Okay.
especially if you're using that water as an ingredient.
Yeah, for sure. Question from Sonia. What are the main microorganisms that can appear in compressed air?
So, I wouldn't say there's any main ones that we see more frequently than others, because every compressed air is different. It's going to depend on where you're located in the world, what you're manufacturing, what your piping looks like. So, all of these factors are going to play a huge role in what kinds of organisms you might find. But we always point to the big ones that manufacturers talk about and that you see in the news, when facilities have recalls or get shut down. So, Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli. But that's why we're really excited to now be able to provide you guys with identification. So that way you can know exactly what the genus and species are, and then determine, is that a risk? Is this something that can make somebody sick? Because not all organisms are dangerous, but some are.
Okay, thank you. Question from Chinwendu. How often should we test for ambient and compressed air?
So most of the specifications, the ones who do mention it, say at a minimum annually, but we always recommend quarterly. And the reason for that is what I pointed to in the presentation, so that you're able to see a trend analysis over the course of the entire year. And why that's important is if you're only testing once, say you come back with some kind of contamination or microorganism, you're not going to be able to have a point in which to point to narrow down where that happened, because if you're testing quarterly, you can say, okay, well, last quarter we were good. This quarter we had some maintenance, and now we're seeing particles. So, we can focus in and try and remediate. But it just gets really hard if you're only testing annually.
Okay. And Sonia, again, if the contact is indirect, is it necessary to carry out analysis?
Yes. So both indirect and direct contact is recommended for testing, because even indirect contact, say people sometimes think that indirect contact might mean that you're using the air to clean off a food surface. Well, if the compressed air is contaminated, then you're going to be contaminating that surface and then placing the food onto it. So that's actually the wording for that, and the idea behind it is kind of like, that is direct contact. Your food is coming into contact with the air has touched.
Okay. Question from Natalia. A lot of questions. We use compressed air for blowing out inside aluminium cylinders, which are later used for food grade gas. You have any experience, ideas about compressed air purity requirement for such specific areas?
So specifically for the gas requirements, I don't have any like specific limits to point to, but I do know that many manufacturers need a certain percentage of the type of gas that you may be using, and that may be to keep the food safe from manufacturing process to production. Like, for example, coffee beans are filled with nitrogen, and that keeps them fresh. Well, the manufacturer has to have a certain percentage of nitrogen, otherwise those beans aren't going to stay fresh. But it is up to the individual manufacturer to decide what those are. But I do know that percentages play a huge role in the food manufacturing process.
Okay. Do you provide the assistance for the initial assessment, risk assessment, and sample collection?
So as far as assistance goes, we can provide you with the documentation, but it really comes down to you, the manufacturer, to you know, walk through your facility and determine what that risk is. Find those critical control points. See what could potentially be hazardous. Um, Find out where you know, materials that could cause particles are located. Are there any leaks? Like all of these kinds of things, because we're not on the ground with you. But like I said before, we do work with manufacturers who can go out to your facility. You know, they're experts. They're aware of the ins and outs of the compressors and the compressed systems. So if that's something you're interested in, please let us know.
Okay, question from Michael. What's the time frame for testing and returning back to Trace Analytics after receiving testing supplies?
So our equipment, for particles, water, and oil, the equipment is a 1-week rental. We typically rent the Pinocchio, the micro impaction samplers, by the day, but we space it out by a week. So, you know, we'll say we ship it out on Monday, you receive it Tuesday, you collect your sample Wednesday and ship it back out. We get them Thursday. So for particles, water, and oil, our turnaround time is 3 to 5 business days after the date of receipt. So that is fairly quickly. We of course offer rush options if that's something that, you know, you're coming close to a deadline. But we also and then for micro, it's 14 business days after the date of receipt. And that's because of the incubation process. It usually takes about 10 days unless you have a custom incubation process or timeline that you want us to use. And we do offer a rush for micros as well. But for PWO, 3 to 5 business days, micro, typically 14, rush options on both.
Okay, thanks. Sonia is asking, is the laboratory in Portugal? We said earlier that the laboratory is in the US, but Trace have customers all over the world, so do get in touch with them. Martin, just to clarify, there are different purity classes for air that is used in packaging manufacturing and also for air used in direct contact with food, e.g. flour within a silo.
Yeah, so you know, the BRCS is the only one that actually has set purity classes for direct and indirect contact. If you're trying to follow like SQF, they actually leave it up to you to determine what purity classes are going to be acceptable for your specific use. I gave an example of what we typically see throughout the industry, but all of the schemes, you know, want the manufacturers to determine what is best for you. So the purity class chart, if you're not familiar with it, is broken into different classes based on particles, water, and oil, and then you can decide what levels your facility needs to meet. And if you have more questions on that, I'll be happy to talk to you about it more.
Okay, and Katarzyna, could you help me out with the purity class? I mean, it's very specific. Purity class for compressed air in coffee industry when used for indirect contact for operation of machines.
Yeah, so it goes back to the risk assessment and monitoring plans. You know, I provided some examples, like I said, of what we see in the different industries in the slides, but we really want you guys to, you know, feel empowered to determine what those purity classes are for your product and for your facility. So please download the risk assessment and monitoring guide. And then reach out if you have more questions. We can talk about it. We can go more into depth.
Yeah, sure. All right, brilliant. Okay, we've got through a lot of questions. I mean, by the end of your presentation, there wasn't any questions, but then a flood, and we've got to the hour. So brilliant. So thanks very much for today, Erin. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you again for having me. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope to hear from all of you, and I hope you have a great Friday.
Thanks. Have a nice weekend, Erin.
You too. Bye.
Okay, I've loaded the certificate in the sidebar. You can download that. We'll be following up with an email in an hour or so with the recording slides and the certificate. And if you do have a question, I'll put the contact details for Trace Analytics if you want to go to their website or ask a question. And I will forward the questions to Erin to follow up on as well. So thanks for attending. It's been great to have you along. Another great webinar. Have a super weekend and we'll see you soon. Bye.